Hi there, Flegg here from Ethical Property Partners, where we help committed serious investors to take their annual returns and earn them on a monthly basis from their property portfolio. So welcome to our sophisticated Saturday episode, where I pose you a question from a real situation, then we break, and then I give you the solution. And the break is the opportunity for you to work out the answer to it for yourself and to practice actually solving these problems that our vendors bring us in a way that makes you money and helps the vendors themselves, serves them as well. So in today's episode, my question is this. We have a vendor who has passed away and the heirs to the estate are wanting to sell the property to us. However, it's not in a mortgageable condition, and so we want to do the works to it before we buy the property. So we want to do the property up, get it to a really good lettable condition before we purchase it so that we can purchase it on a mortgage. My question is, how many ways are there of doing this? There are several. What are the pros and cons of each? Which would you choose? And what do you need to watch out for? Let me just run through that again. So, we've got a vendor who has passed away, so we're in negotiation with the heirs to the property. We are needing to do some work to it, about £20,000 worth of works. How can we do this and then buy it with a mortgage? How can we secure our money, is a better way of putting it. And what do we need to watch out for? I'll give you the answer right after the break. Hey guys, welcome back. So, let me tell you how we worked through this and decided to solve it. So first off, what do you need to watch out for? Well, the most important thing to be aware of here is who are the executors of the estate, who are the executors of the will. Because when there's a probate situation, and we've had it where we've done a deal with a vendor and then the vendor's passed away and we've lost the deal because the executors of the will don't honour the agreement that we had with the vendor. So in this case, we hadn't spoken to the vendor before they passed away, but we were speaking to the heirs. What you must be very careful of is that they are also the executors and there's not a third party who's also an executor of the will. Because in this situation, you're going to spend £20,000 on a property. You need to be sure that you've got it secured properly. And what sometimes happens is you have an heir or two heirs and a solicitor or someone else who's an executor to the will who's not on the same page. And so you could spend £20,000 doing all the work, but then not actually get the property, not actually have them sell it to you because of third parties unwilling to go ahead with the transaction. So really important you check that, and really important you get your solicitors to check it. So once you've checked that and you know that the two people you're speaking to are the actual heirs of the will, that they are the ones that are actually controlling the property, and that the property is going through probate or has gone through probate, because that's really important as well, you are now in a position to secure the property legally before you start actually spending any money on it. So first way you could do it is on a handshake or a promise. I've never done that. Vendors have a very strange affliction, and it generally kicks in just after you've finished doing up their property for them, where they decide that actually they don't want to sell it to you. And I've seen that happen before. I've seen it happen on a unsecured property done on a handshake. I've seen it done on properties where there are rock solid contracts in place and it has to go to court. And for some of you who might be thinking, oh, I don't want to go to court, I have never had to take a vendor to court. Just having the right paperwork in place can solve it, because it's a big enough deterrent. And so if you get it right at the start, you can avoid a whole host of problems later on. So let's put to one side, although it is an option, doing it on trust. The next is what I call a doorstep option. So that's where you sat down with the vendor, you've got an option agreement, you explain it to them, and they sign it there and then. It's a weak agreement. Would I spend £20,000 on their property with a doorstep option? Well, it depends on your attitude to risk. I have done so before. I've got very nervous before where, you've spent 20 grand and then the vendor says, actually, I'm not so sure about selling now, and you have to have a conversation with them about having this option. If it went to court, I'm not sure a doorstep option would hold water. I think the vendor could say, I didn't know what I was signing. You know, big bad property investor Frank Flegg, he told me that I could back out if I wanted to, that he was just doing it out of the goodness of his heart, and he does this all the time for people, does up their houses for free, spends 20 grand, and then leaves as a happy chappy. You can imagine the conversation in front of the judge. I think I'd be in a really weak situation. So doorstep option is doable, perhaps not the best solution. The next solution that you have is you could have a legally advised option. So a legally advised option is where the vendor goes and seeks legal advice from a solicitor. It can be a solicitor you've recommended. The solicitor can have worked with you lots before and know that you're trustworthy, know that you're good at what you're doing, etc. But in this case, you're paying the solicitor, or the vendor's paying the solicitor for legal advice. Much more secure, because they will get them to sign to say, I understand that I have to sell this property to Frank, I understand that I can't change my mind, etc. That will definitely hold up in court. The downsides of that is that it's more of a hindrance to getting the deal done. A doorstep option, the vendor will sign it there and then you can start the next day. It might take 4 weeks to get a legally advised option done, because first off, the vendor's going to prove their ID to the solicitor's got to take instructions, solicitor's got to consider the option agreement, solicitor's got to advise their client's got to write to say they agree with it. It could easily take 4 weeks. Now, if you've got a good solicitor, you get it done in probably 7 to 10 days, but it's still 7 to 10 days for the vendor to change their mind. Next, more robust, is an actual exchange of contracts. Now, an exchange of contracts is very, very robust in English law, because both parties are signing, both parties have got their legal representation, and you have a fixed completion date. The problem with a fixed completion date is you have to then complete at that point. So your refurb has to be done. If you're going to flip it to a third-party investor, if you're going to put it on the open market, you actually have a ticking clock. Now, you might say, well, you've got a ticking clock with an option agreement, and you do, but you can often put an option agreement a lot further in the future. So if you're aiming for a 6-month completion, you might put an option agreement out at 12 months to give yourself a bit of breathing space. But if you exchange contracts and you tell the vendor that the completion date is in 12 months, it's a bit of a harder sale to say, oh, but don't worry, I'm going to bring it forward and do it in 6 months' time. They may not believe you as readily as an option agreement where you can actually complete at any point, giving 7 or 14 days notice. And then the most secure way of doing this is actually to complete on the property. So if the property doesn't have a mortgage at the moment, and it is unmortgageable, it doesn't mean it doesn't have a mortgage, but if it is unencumbered currently, you could actually buy it from the vendor now on vendor finance. So you could buy it from the vendor. Let's just say you're buying it for £400,000. You could buy it from the vendor for £400,000. You would have to pay stamp duty, but the vendor would lend you the £400,000 and then you give it back to the vendor. It's a nominal transaction. No money actually changes hands. But now you owe the vendor 400k. That can be interest-free for 6 months, interest-free for 12 months. But now the property's in your name. You hold title. It's far, far safer. The beauty of this solution, of course, is that you are able to spend the 20 grand on it, wait a few months, and then just refinance. So you can just refinance and give the vendor the money. And most lenders will be absolutely fine with that. Obviously, you disclose how you bought it, disclose that you're now refinancing, etc. But you've already bought the property at 400k, and so refinancing it is going to be much easier because you've established that valuation just a few months before. So those are the different ways of solving a situation like this, guys. And my partners often ask me, well, what would you do, Frank? Well, it depends. It depends on how okay I am with losing the 20 grand. It depends on my relationship with the vendor. How safe do I feel with them? How trustworthy do they seem? And people say, no, Frank, you can't treat different vendors differently. I do, I absolutely do. I treat investors differently, I treat my clients differently to one another, I treat vendors differently to one another. I cater my service to each and every person that I come into contact with. And so if a vendor is really friendly, really trustworthy, really grateful, comes across as really genuine, if everything they tell me makes sense, if everything they tell me actually checks out in reality on land registry with the solicitors, etc., then I'm far more likely to rely on a doorstep option agreement. However, if what they say on the phone isn't the same as when I get there, if it's 3 people that are executors, not just the 2 that they mentioned at the start, if they tell me they paid X for it 10 years ago and actually they paid Y for it 8 years ago, things like that give you a real sense of the person. You think, actually, I need to be really watertight with my documentation here. I can't give the vendor the benefit of the doubt because, quite frankly, they don't seem trusting of it. But here's the thing. The more security you have, the more complex you make the transaction. And you can see each of those 5 solutions have pros and cons, but each are more complex. The more complex the deal gets, the safer it is for you in this instance, but the harder the sale is to the vendor. The harder the explanation, the more likely they are to say, oh, it's just too complicated, I'll just put it in an auction. And they'll earn less money in an auction, but it will feel safer for them. And that's the balance that you're always trying to strike with a vendor. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this little sophisticated Saturday episode. If you can hit the notification bell, click the subscribe button, that'd be fantastic. Hit the share button as well if there are people that you think will benefit from this. That will really help us to grow the channel. And until next time, happy investing.